Welcome to Coach Ellis Johnson, and this will be Coach's final appearance of the football season. It's been a lot of fun, Coach.
Well, it has been. I hope nobody's been keeping tabs on my predictions, so it won't come up with how bad I was.
No, you were fine. It's tough picking these games, but we know now how the postseason's laid out. Let's start with the college football playoff. December 28th, the first round of games, the semifinals. You'll have number 1 seed LSU taking on number 4 seed Oklahoma in the Peach Bowl in Atlanta, and number 2 seed Ohio State versus number 3 seed Clemson in the Fiesta Bowl in Glendale, Arizona. Let's start with LSU and Oklahoma. I got to be honest with you, just watching the two teams throughout the season, LSU looks like a better football team. Now, having said that, this Oklahoma program, they're blue blood, man. It's like Alabama and some of these others. You never would count them out in this format. Jalen Hurts is one of the best winners that we've ever seen in the history of college football. I think he's 38-3 now as a starter. He got that team into the playoff when a lot of weeks they didn't look like a playoff team, and now they get to be the underdog. Having said that, LSU's been almost unstoppable all year. Any scenario or what do you think Oklahoma will have to do? How will they have to play in this game to give themselves an opportunity to upset LSU?
Yeah, I think when you get to these last four, any of them could beat anybody on a given day. So none of these things are gimmies. One thing I was really impressed with, I had not seen Oklahoma all year, and I got caught a lot of the Baylor game, and I know Baylor was struggling at quarterback. But Oklahoma's knock has been their defense all year, and they just completely destroyed Baylor on that side of the ball. But, if they can play defense the way they did in that game and somehow slow LSU down a little bit, I think they can score points. It probably is going to have to be a 30-something game for Oklahoma to have a shot to win it. It's possible that could happen. It's difficult at this stage right now to bet on anybody against LSU. They've played probably the most difficult schedule of all four, without a doubt, and they've come through it undefeated. And I think they said they played 5 top 10 teams on the way through this thing. They were top 10 when they played them. So they've just been phenomenal, and you have to give them the favorite right now.
Yeah, you do. And I'm curious what and I know I've asked you this before, but still, for LSU, when Saban left the program, he left it in great shape. Les Miles inherited a juggernaut. He won a national championship himself, played for another. And even after they started slipping in terms of not being able to beat Alabama, nobody ever questioned their athletes. I mean, they were still, they passed the eye test. They were still recruiting at a high level, but they had not been able to beat Alabama. Orgeron comes in there, not the first choice. He said, hey, we're coming, but it seemed like the same old LSU last year, even with Burrow. I mean, they were good on defense. At times they would have big games on offense, but not consistent, and, did win 10 games, but got beat 29-0 by Alabama. Then they decide to bring in Joe Brady. Ensminger works with him. They make this conversion, and Burrow went from looking like a pretty good quarterback, a guy who might be a backup in the NFL, to having one of the greatest seasons in the history of college football, probably going to be the number 1 overall pick. They've been unstoppable on offense. We've seen other teams make offensive changes and implement them, but I don't think I've ever seen one that just went from being average to the best offense in the country just like a snap of the fingers. Is it because they had so many good athletes and Burrow's so good? I mean, how does that happen that quickly? It was like from game one, they immediately just morphed into this juggernaut on offense.
Well, I think you always, if you're that successful, there's no one factor. There's a lot of factors. But if you look at last year, and there's not that much difference in the depth chart, and this year, then I think you have to say Coach Brady made a tremendous difference.
Yeah.
I think he did win the Boyles Award, well deserved. But something, gave him an opportunity to change the complexion of what they were on an offensive attack. And I think you have to go back and see what Joe Brady bring to the table. Burrow was out both years. He's more prolific this year. I think most of the other players, they probably have about 3 or 4 starters leave last year. But, they obviously have good talent. But I think that has to be a big factor in why they're so explosive.
And how much credit, you've been on coaching staffs, you know the dynamics. Sometimes there can be rifts within coaching staffs. How much credit does Steve Ensminger deserve. I mean, he's still got the title of offensive coordinator, even though Brady's the play caller. But he has seemed like he has. I saw a tweet he put out the other day. Congratulations, Joe, you deserve it. When Brady got the Broyles Award as a top assistant, to kind of be able to move your ego to the side the way Ensminger's done. Of course, he's a veteran coach. He's been around the block, but I think he deserves some credit there too.
Absolutely. And I don't know which one's actually coaching the quarterback, but I thought it was Steve. But he's an LSU guy. And I think, if he thinks something's best for LSU Tigers,
right,
he's right. And, of course, Orgeron was not an LSU grad, but he's the same way. They really feel that strongly about the place. They love it. And they're going to do what's best for it, including stepping out of the way if it's not the best organization for them to be in charge of.
Before we get to Ohio State and Clemson, the irony, Coach, have you thought about, of course, I've been saying that the portal's kind of like college football free agency. We got 4 teams in the playoff. Only one of them, Clemson, has a quarterback that it recruited and signed. Fields, Hurts, Burrow, all transfers. That's mind-blowing to me.
It's amazing. And, not to make too much out of this, but every one of the programs that they left, well, I'm sorry, 2 of them, they're not in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And didn't finish particularly well. Wasn't necessarily because of that one player. LSU, of course, is very ironic that Burrow leaves Ohio State, goes to LSU, and Fields leaves Georgia, and goes to Ohio State. Both of them are in the playoffs.
That's crazy.
So I don't know. I used to be a big critic of all that, but I think it's gotten so specialized on a college level now, and quarterbacks are so critical to the success of a team. It's really, really just one little shade away from the NFL when you get up to these top teams. So, a player literally could fit a system or a situation a little bit better. And I guess that's part of what's happened with Burrow leaving Ohio State and being successful. Fields leaving Georgia and Ohio State being just as successful. It just kind of speaks to the fact that maybe a quarterback fits the situation better.
This Ohio State Clemson game, don't get me wrong, we're going to enjoy both games. I mean, that's the playoff, man. Everybody's going to be tuned in. But Ohio State and Clemson, this looks like a doozy to me, Coach. I mean, I as good as LSU is, and they're phenomenal. Oklahoma is a perennial playoff team, but you look at Ohio State and Clemson. Both these teams, to me, 13-0, and they're total football teams, complete teams, defense, offense, the kicking game. Dynamic quarterbacks. Ryan Day's in his first year as the full-time head coach, but he's done an incredible job. And Dabo is making a play to be known as the best coach in college football. This game on paper looks like it could be a dandy. It
does. The one thing you kind of look at the other pairing, and both of them have had their question marks on defense during the course of the year. They've just outscored people. Clemson and Ohio State have been a little different. They've obviously put up a bunch of points, but their defenses have been almost as good, if not better. I think Clemson's defense really deserves the credit for them being undefeated. They were not playing all that well on offense for about a 3 or 4 game stretch back in the early mid part of the season, and the defense still was consistently good every game. I think they maybe had 2 or 3 games where somebody went 300 yards or more. So that's the thing I think the 2 of them have an advantage of going into this thing is they have been more consistently good on defense throughout the year. I do think that LSU's defense is underrated. I think they're much more talented and destructive than people give them credit. But if you look at them statistically, it's hard to bet against Ohio State and Clemson.
All right, who do you like in the 2 games? Let's start with the Peach Bowl, Oklahoma and LSU.
I'd go with LSU.
Ohio State and Clemson.
I'd lean to Clemson.
And then if it plays out that way, LSU and Clemson in the championship game, who would you be picking there?
I'd lean to LSU.
All right, we'll see, Coach. Let's get to some bowl games. Obviously, we'll start with Alabama. First of all, and I don't think it really matters. For Alabama, you're either in the playoff or you're not. But for the committee to put them at 13 and drop them out of the New Year's 6 picture as well, hey, listen, I said this last week. I don't think anybody on that committee believes there's 12 football teams better than Alabama in the country, but they did put them at 13. What do you make of that?
I totally agree. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to get on the diatribe, Gary, but I'm not a big fan of the whole thing, the playoffs or any of it. I do think the committee does a fabulous job with what the situation is. getting the 4 best teams. But the way this whole thing is done, I don't know. It's just very difficult for it to ever be equitable all the way down the line. I hope they don't have a tremendous letdown, because this period of time is very important to a football team. And, having extra practice time and performing, with a winner's attitude and fighting through situations like that. When you go to Alabama, you go to win championships. If one of those years you're there, that's not on the table, I still think it's important and it's critical to see what the complexion of that team is and how they're going to handle this in the locker room and when they show up on that bowl game.
Yeah, and that's the question. First of all, the big question surrounding Alabama here in town is how many of these guys are going to sit out? How many are going to play? This is new territory for Alabama. Since this has become a thing with players not playing in the bowl game, Alabama's been in the playoff every year, so it hasn't mattered. But they get Michigan. This is a helmet game. I mean, you got two of the most famous helmets in college football going head-to-head for Jim Harbaugh. I think this is a huge opportunity for him as a coach and Michigan as a program to knock off Alabama. And I think they're going to be dialed in and ready to play, and you do wonder where Alabama's going to be at in terms of its mental preparation. But this is a very attractive game in those terms, plus it's SEC versus Big Ten. And that's Nick Saban's job, is to get them ready to play. But we've seen Alabama in the past, Coach, against Utah in the bowl game after they lost that heartbreaker to Florida in the SEC championship game. Saban said afterwards, we weren't as ready to play as we should be. Then after the Kick 6 game, they got beat by Oklahoma in the Sugar Bowl and kind of heard some of the same grumblings that, we didn't make it into the BCS game. We lost our competitive edge. Do you worry at all that Alabama won't prepare the way it needs to be ready for a Michigan team that, as I said, I think is going to be dialed in for this one?
Well, I think it's going to be a very tough process. And the thing you brought up is so important. Some of these kids that are definitely leaving this year, they're going to be concerned about playing that last game and getting hurt. And whether they play or they don't play is important. But even if they do play, if they play not to get hurt, it'll be a mess. But I don't think anybody in the nation can handle it any better than Coach Saban. He's not used to this either, but he's done it before. And I think they'll have a good showing. You make another good point, though. It's a pretty important game for Harbaugh. They're complaining up there.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing he's done is quite good enough. He can't beat Ohio State. This could be a big, big booster for him going in the offseason for recruiting.
Auburn and Minnesota, right across, just down the road from Orlando over in Tampa in the Outback Bowl. Again, SEC versus Big Ten. Minnesota, is a team that, they entered the national conversation this year. They're 10-2. Auburn's 9-3. Auburn, a lot like Michigan. Michigan's got 3 losses, but you look at who they lost to. They lost to Ohio State, Wisconsin, and Penn State. Auburn lost to LSU, Florida, and Georgia. And Minnesota, as I said, is kind of one of these teams on the rise. This looks like this could be a fun game.
Absolutely. I do think that the Big Ten and SEC are by far top to bottom, the heart of the conferences. So, those two teams have been through a little bit tougher season than a lot of people who don't have those losses. But I do think the key is Auburn being able to throw the ball some effectively. And if they're able to do that, I think they win this game, because I think they'll be able to run it. I think defensively they're good enough to shut Minnesota down and not let them get up into the 20s.
Got another SEC versus Big Ten. Jeremy Pruitt in Tennessee, one of the great turnarounds in college football, really. I mean, for them to wind up getting to 7-5, taking on Tom Allen in Indiana, 8-4 in the Gator Bowl. And again, this is a game that looks like it could be very competitive.
Yeah, I have not seen Indiana one snap this year, so obviously not making a very educated evaluation. But Tennessee has just been on a really positive part of their season. They haven't been all that sexy and entertaining and so forth, but they have defensively for 6 weeks in a row now played very solid and given a chance to win a football game. And they're taking care of the football. If they do those things, continue to play real good defense and take care of the football, I think they'll win this bowl game.
All right, before we close it out, let's get to the New Year's Day Bowls. The Sugar Bowl in New Orleans, Georgia versus Baylor. We saw a very poor performance from Georgia last year against Texas after losing the SEC championship game to Alabama. Now they lose to LSU. I think Matt Rule at Baylor's done one of the best jobs in the history of college football, what he's done with that program. Baylor versus Georgia, who you like?
I think Georgia. I do have a little concern about some of the factors you're bringing up. Will they be, at their best? Will they be excited to play it? Will they be, really want to be there? Baylor, on the other hand, with a new coach and knocking on the door of upsetting Oklahoma and having a chance to get maybe be edge into the playoffs, but it's two different, coming from two different directions. But I really just feel like if there's a way in the next 2-3 weeks they can get somebody healthy or somebody steps up. But right now it's a little bit of musical chairs at quarterback for Baylor, and against that Georgia defense, that's not a very good situation. I think Georgia wins the game.
You got Florida in the Orange Bowl, against a Virginia team that just got absolutely undressed against Clemson in the ACC championship game.
Florida will beat Virginia, unless there's some injury or anything I don't know about. Florida will beat Virginia pretty convincing.
Wisconsin and Oregon in the Rose Bowl.
That one is a little harder to pick. I think it could be one of the better games, to actually watch. The points you're bringing up about teams not being excited to go to some of these games when they're used to going to the big ones. Sometimes fans are the same way, and that's one thing I don't like about the playoffs. I think it's relegated every other bowl to sort of a minor viewing status. This game could be really good to watch. I don't think Wisconsin's balanced, but they're just so powerful in the running game. Oregon hadn't seen anybody on that West Coast that runs as good a running game as Wisconsin, but I do think Oregon's got a little more balance in their offense. I wouldn't be able to pick a winner on this one because I hadn't seen them a lot, but I probably would give Wisconsin a little edge.
All right, Coach, about a minute. Final game, the Cotton Bowl. Penn State takes on Memphis. Memphis, the highest-ranked non-Power 5 team. Great opportunity for Memphis, but like so often happens, they have a great year. They lose their coach, Norvell, to Florida State. An opportunity to play against a Big Ten team. How do you see this matchup?
I think you hit on the head. And the other thing about Norvell, I'm pretty sure he runs the offense and calls it. And if that's the case, it's a hard thing to deal with, even more so if you're losing a CEO, a head coach who didn't control either side of the ball, but just kind of overall the program. Sometimes that works out okay, but I think that's going to be a really hard thing for them to overcome. Could affect them a little bit emotionally. It definitely could affect them as far as organization, game control. And I think Penn State's played in a lot tougher conference, obviously, and a lot tougher schedule. And if they don't beat themselves, I think they'll beat Memphis.
Coach, great stuff, man. It's been a pleasure having you on again this season, and hopefully we can do it again next year.
Sounds great, Garrett. If we're alive and well, we'll be there.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Coach.